tried so hard.
What you really want? What you really want?
But it doesn't even matter. Come on, tried so hard.
What you really want?
It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. Come on, try.
Boy, give me a sign. Dog, I meet bitches, the street bitches, slash, Cocoa Puff, sweet bitches, think you wanna eat bitches, but not me.
I tried so
I fuck with these hoes from a distance. The instant they start to catch feelings, I start to. What is it you want from a nigga? I gave you, you gave me. I played you, you played me.
and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to lose it all. But in the end.
Welcome once again to another edition of the Showcase Pod. I am Don Vega, and I'm joined by the boss, Chris Blackheart. And today we got a very special guest live in studio, Brandon Higgins, better known as Knuckles Nelson. Knuckles, it's a pleasure having you today.
Oh, it's great to be here with you guys tonight. I wouldn't, and no place else I'd rather be.
There you go. It's hot, but it's going to get hotter. You ready?
I'm ready. The truth, the lies, bring them out, bring them on.
The stories.
I love stories.
All those things. First of all, Brandon, we like to get right to the point here. So how do you fell in love with professional wrestling, and take us through those steps, how you started your career?
Well, please call me Knuckles. I'm Knuckles Nelson, inside and outside of the ring. I'm here tonight representing Boogie's Wrestling Camp in Shawsville, Virginia, the great Jimmy Valiant, and also representing the Brotherhood, the late, great Boston bad boy Tony Rumble. And I started watching wrestling like everyone when I was a kid, and I was totally enthralled with it, and I wanted to become a wrestler at a very young age, watching people like the late, great Adrian Adonis, the Von Erichs, Jimmy Valiant. And as the years went on, it got so bad I had to start doing it. So I ended up at the Coastal Pro Wrestling School in Freetown, Massachusetts, with Nick Steele and Bob Evans and Brian Brieger, and that's where it all started for me.
Oh, man. Nicky Steele, rest in peace. You know, what a great guy. What a great in-ring competitor Nicky was. So you start your career there. Do you start wrestling? How far along before you start wrestling, and when was your first match?
Well, my first match was against the late, great Mo Payne, who a lot of people might not know because it was so long ago. He was a 400-pound wrestler who also came out of the Coastal Pro Wrestling School, and I wrestled him in 1993, and he basically wiped the floor with me. But that was my introduction to the wrestling world. And back then, some of the people that were around the school were Scott King, Nick Steele, Rip Morrison, Johnny Royal. So there are a lot of good wrestlers that were there. And just being in the class every day, you learn so much.
So, it's interesting you say about all these great names that you mentioned. What are the biggest differences that you notice in the business now when young guys come in, and the difference between today's day and when you got started?
Well, there was no such thing as a performance center, or back in the early 90s when I started wrestling, there wasn't a wrestling school, on every corner. It was limited. There was still, kayfabe was still a thing when I broke in. And I think the basics, how to take bumps, how to hit the ropes, how to protect yourself, how to protect your opponent, those things are all probably still the same. But I think whether it's basketball, football, baseball, whatever it is, wrestling also progressed, and it also got to the point where today it's an elite sport with elite athletes, with elite trainers, and you don't have to look any further than Orlando, Florida, where I know you've been, Don.
Yep. Blackheart?
No, unfortunately, a lot of it that is honest. I mean, it is, people undervalue what wrestlers do. A lot of people think they can do it. I mean, how many people come in through our center, 30 days or even 2 weeks later, they're gone. I mean, they can barely do a push-up, sit-up, or squat. Never mind throw a plank in there and they're dead.
So you mentioned your first match being against Mo Payne. What promotion was that for?
That was for Coastal Pro Wrestling. That was Nick Steele's father, Frank Castahana, who has passed away also. And they ran a nice little promotion. It was on the Seacoast in Massachusetts. They would run around Fall River, Seekonk, New Bedford, and a little bit further down in Freetown around the Cape area. And they ran pretty solid for about a year.
Okay. Now, Coastal being your introduction, what was your next step in wrestling as far as working for different companies along the way?
Well, one of my favorite stories about Nick Steele and his father Frank were they were very supportive in their students getting out there into the world in wrestling. So they wanted me to go and work for other promotions, and it wasn't shortly after that I made my way to Yankee Pro Wrestling, and Phil Apollo was booking at the time, and people that were there then were Scott Taylor, Rick Fuller, PJ Walker, Garfield Quinn, myself. There was a nice little core of wrestlers that were in that area. But at one point, I made my way to Hanover, Massachusetts. There was a gentleman by the name of the Boston Bad Boy, Tony Rumble, who was running a show up there on a Saturday afternoon. And I just, by myself, drove up there, and I wrestled Tony that night and that afternoon. And I was on every single one of his shows after that until he died, and that's where I really got in with the Century Wrestling Alliance. But there was one other thing that I'll mention there. I also thought I was ready for the WWF when I was really young. And I had like 16 matches under my belt, and I went to Tony Gurria at a house show in the Civic Center, and he asked me how long I've been wrestling. I said 5 years, a lie. He said, who trained you? I said, Paul Roma, a lie. And he said, do you have a problem with the Razor's Edge? And I said, no. And the next thing you know, I was in the ring with Razor Ramon, taking the Razor's Edge, and that's where I really knew I had to go back to the independents. I was not even remotely ready for something like that.
Okay, interesting story there, Nux. So you was young at the time. You got your first try with the WWF at the time. Wrestle Scott Hall. He's also passed. Rest in peace, Scott. After that, you mentioned that at that point in time, were you already starting with Tony at that point in time in what was Century before it became NWA? We'll get into that.
Yeah, I showed up unbooked. Went into the locker room. I was there so early the ring hadn't even arrived yet. And I went to the locker room. The first person I encountered was Hacksaw Jim Duggan. He was sitting there playing solitaire with his 2x4 leaning up against the wall. The next person I encountered was King Kong Bundy sitting there. And I'm like, I'm a mark. I'm a big fan. So I'm like, I just don't want to screw this up. The next person I encounter is Tony Atlas and Tito Santana talking to each other. And as I walked a little bit further, I heard Atlas say to Tito, who the hell is that? and Atlas said, I don't know, some young whippersnapper. And then the door flew open, and Rumble came in with Pat Doyle, introduced myself. I told him my name was Tully McShane, which it was at the time. He told me he hated that name, and he was going to put me under a mask to wrestle for him that night. And the match was very short. We got in the ring. He clotheslined me right across my mouth, and blood everywhere. And when I came back to the locker room, then he put me in the Boston Crab. Match is over really fast. In the locker room in the back, Tony Atlas walks up to me and he goes, that's good for the business, kid. And he said, now go clean your face up and go thank Tony Rumble for the opportunity. And that's exactly what I did. I went over to Rumble after I cleaned up my face. I apologized for not turning my head, even though he completely potatoed me right in the teeth. And he said he had an idea for a wrestling character named Knuckles Nelson. And that was it. After that, I was Knuckles Nelson. And as they say, the rest is history.
Okay. So back then, you didn't have all this entitlement. You were thankful for the opportunities that you get. And, it's completely different now. Guys in the business, they feel entitled like the minute they walk into a wrestling school. So what you're saying is there was none of that back then. You had to earn your stripes. You had to earn your keeps, basically.
I would say I didn't experience anything like that. I didn't win many matches in the beginning. I wrestled a lot of, I was so fortunate to some of the big names I was wrestling. And then Tony came up with the idea for the brass knuckles, where I was going to knock out my opponent with brass knuckles. And next thing you know, I'm in the ring, and I'm still relatively young, with Jimmy Snuka, Tito Santana, Perry Saturn. I have to think about it. There's more. Tom Brandy. And I'm knocking to Atlas, knocking these guys out cold with brass knuckles and getting 1, 2, 3 victories like that. And it was surreal because I knew who all those guys were, and I was really nobody. I really was, and I was there was I can't really say for sure because I'm not wrestling today, but I would say the dues paying process was a little different back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. Chris?
It was rougher, to say the least. It wasn't. It's hard because, as we know, society has changed, and some days you have to be nicer. And even people a couple of days ago, someone said, "Hey, you guys were much rougher on the trainees like 5 years ago," and I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then they're telling me stories. I'm like, "Well, I don't remember half of it," but it is. It was. I don't know. It's not that you were rough. Is you wanted them to learn, and you weren't holding hands. And ironically, when you said you got clothesline in the face and you thanked them. One of the things we always tell people: you shut your mouth and you open your ears. And it's amazing what you're going to learn and not screw up.
Yeah. And I also didn't ask for any money. I didn't ask for anything. I just did what I was told. But I just think this would be a good opportunity for me to just congratulate you, Chris, on having what has to be the longest running wrestling promotion in this area. I mean, you've been at it for a long time.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I would say.
Well, I see you got a few grays now, so.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm just happy that it stays on the top some days, No, we look at we started in 2007, and even like we were talking about training schools, when we started, we're basically the originals. We haven't changed ownership. We've added trainers, but if you look at the last 5 years, no one has got signed from any school in New England under the current regime. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times people have their heads, you got this person or that person, or they're buying names, to say, hey, look at Walter, they bought the name, it's underneath the banner, but they haven't got anyone signed. It's totally different. So it's, a lot of things are different. Some things should stay the same. The guys, they should earn it. They have to be dedicated. You can't be in the catering business, and they have to give you something.
Yeah. Well, speaking of catering and not being catered to, so now you started your career as Knuckles Nelson. You're working for the bad boy Tony Rumble. How does the brotherhood come about?
Well, before we go any further, when you mentioned the brotherhood, I need to do a shout out right now, if that's okay, to my brother, the gentleman, Chris Astudi, in Gales Ferry, Connecticut, who is a very close personal friend of mine. And I also want to say hello to my beautiful girlfriend, Michelle. And without her, I don't know where I would be in life right now. She has just totally changed my life, and I love you so much, Michelle. As far as the question you asked me about Tony Rumble, could you ask it again?
So now you're starting your career. You're working for the bad boy Tony Rumble. How does the brotherhood come about? How does that faction come about?
So the Brotherhood was an organization and a faction long before I was ever in wrestling. The Brotherhood started with people like Taz, Tony Atlas. You'd have to go back and watch old ICW tapes, but those are some pretty big names right there that were involved in the Brotherhood.
Yes.
So when Tony left the ICW and started the Century Wrestling Alliance, eventually he always talked about wanting to bring back the Brotherhood. He always wanted to do it. And there was a small wrestling arena in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts called Champs Arena that was run by, it seems like everybody's passed away. Everybody's dead. Big City Mike, who is no longer with us. And Big City had this nice little arena up there in Salisbury. And one night we were up there, and Tony Rumble took me in the ring, and he didn't even tell me he was going to do this. This thing was a total shoot. He brought me in the ring, and he said, I want to make you an offer to join the Brotherhood. And I accepted immediately. The whole thing was totally real. I had no idea he was going to say this to me. And then he started adding other members like Mr. Intensity, Eric Sprazier, one of the most underrated wrestlers ever in this area. That guy was so talented. He should have been a big star in wrestling. He was, and that's not the right way to say that, because he was a star in wrestling. But he's one of my favorite wrestlers. Trey, the Smooth Operator, was also in the Brotherhood. Of course, Tony Rumble. And when he started adding members and building this group up, it just kind of took off. And, that led us to our first NWA World Title reign, which was, again, totally surreal and unexpected. And that was pretty awesome, too.
So, yeah, you were actually, like you just mentioned, one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions. Now, from your beginning, from your humble beginnings now as one half of the NWA Tag Team Champions, what did that feel like to you at that time? Did it feel surreal? you know, how did that experience felt?
The way that all went down was Howard Brody was the president of the NWA, another guy that's passed away. How are we still sitting here? Everybody's passed away. Howard Brody's the president of the NWA, and him and Rumble are always elbowing for position, jockeying for position. They were constantly fighting with each other. And Tony explained to him that he had a team up here in New England that should get the NWA tag belts, and that it was going to happen at the NWA's 50th anniversary in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So Tony tells me we're going to get the belts. We're driving down there, and I said, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. They're going to screw us. They're just getting us down there. So, and then they're going to have us lose it. That's just what's going to happen. And when we got there, it was a 4-way tag team match with a team called the Border Patrol, a Team Extreme, and Tully Blanchard and Dr. Tom Pritchard. And I just assumed that Pritchard and Blanchard were going to win that match, yeah. But lo and behold, we did. We came out on top. I hit a sunset flip off the top rope on one of the Border Patrol members, and we walked out of there, the NWA World Tag Team Champions. And it was the NWA wasn't what it used to be at this time, but these guys were Rumble and Howard Brody. These guys were really trying to rejuvenate the NWA, and they did. And they did rejuvenate it, and you know that led to a lot of things. Traveling all over the country, traveling to Japan. It was WWF and WCW appearances. It was all thanks to the Boston Bad Boy.
Okay, Chris, any questions?
No, if I'm year-wise, was that 98, 99?
That was the first one was September 25th, 1999.
So now you guys are the NWA Tag Team Champions. You're traveling all over the country. How does Japan come about? And what were your experiences like in Japan and being outside the United States? Was it the first tour that you did, or how many tours you got to go to?
Well, when we won those belts, a lot of doors opened up for us. We were able to set up. I was very friendly with Jim Cornette at the time, and Jim Cornette used to tell me, you need to set up a loop around the southeastern part of the country. You need to go and you need to call these promoters and tell them, do you want to have the NWA Tag Champions on your show? And just do that around. And that's what we did. And we were wrestling in little places like Pikeville, Kentucky, and in little towns in Ohio, and doing the old school, on the road. All day and night to go do a 15-minute wrestling match somewhere. And I really never got into wrestling for money. I did it because I loved it and still love it. But we were getting paid, and we were making a living at doing this. And the next thing you know, I'm at a WWF TV taping, and I start to become friendly with a guy named Shun Yamaguchi. And Shun, who is a big star now, who was one half of the Japanese broadcast team for WWE, was always telling me that there's going to be some tours coming up in Japan. There's going to be some tours coming up in Japan. And I would just be like, yeah. And then the next thing you know, Rumble calls me up, and he said, we have, you guys are booked in Japan. You got to be at the airport in Boston whenever it was. And next thing you know, I'm on a plane getting blown halfway across the world to Japan. And that was amazing. The first time we went to Japan, we landed after 20 hours of drinking on a plane with a bunch of lunatic wrestlers from around the country, including Wild Bill Irwin, Derek Dukes, Sprazier, Barry Darso, a lot of Minnesota guys were there. And we get off the plane, and I just want to go to a hotel and sleep, but they take us right to an arena.
Okay.
And I'm like not in any condition to wrestle. And we walk into the locker room, and there's all these really serious Japanese wrestlers that I don't know anything. And Wally Yamaguchi, Shun's brother, comes over to me, who's promoting this whole deal, and he says, those are your opponents over there. And these guys were they wanted to fight, And Wally goes, you speak Japanese, right? And he walks away from me.
Wow.
And so we're getting ribbed left and right. I remember one time Wally said to me, do I have to pay you extra for a title match? And I was so naive, I had to think about it for a minute before I realized he was pulling my leg. He was ribbing me the whole time. So we went over to these guys with a translator, and worked out a match and went out, and I'm just like putting one foot in front of the other at this point. Then every day you're on a plane, on a bus or in a taxi or in a car or something, going from town to village to the mountains to wherever it is, and you wrestle as you know from going to Puerto Rico, you're wrestling every day, and it's like a good, it's there's nothing like that. Getting that international experience is, I can't think of anything better for a wrestler that's trying to get to the highest level. You have to have that in your toolbox. And we got it, and we traveled all over the country, and I got to go over there 3 times. I went on 3 different tours of Japan.
Okay, Chris.
I love the stories. I love the timeline because just around that time, I started training in '97, and I remember at that time going '97, '98. Tony was doing the tapings at Good Times Emporium, which is ironic because that's the first time I really met him. Which is funny because the first time I met him, I think you were kicking him in the face because that was a 6-man. It was yourself, Eric, and I can't remember.
Yeah, it was Duke Staunton, the third.
It was see, versus you,
Bronze Bomber, I think,
yeah.
and Stiff Mike.
Stiff Mike, yep.
So stiff.
He wasn't so stiff. I think that's how the name came up, though.
I don't know. Maybe we'll ask Knuckles how the name came.
It was.
Well, I'll refresh your memory. So I'm still green. I get invited over to do the tapings. I worked a show here in Rhode Island. Scott Dickinson was the referee. He liked my work. He said, I think, we could use you down at Good Time. So I started coming in doing tapings. And one of the tapings, it was a match, 6-man tag, which was Duke Stoughton, Eric, and yourself, against the guys mentioned, Stiff Mike and Bronze Bomber. And I think, if I recall, Mike was in the ring opening up, and you guys went to take him in the corner, and you chopped him, and then Eric came. They went to town on him, and I think Mike covered up.
I do believe, yes.
Yeah, Mike covered up on you guys, and then you guys kind of laid it into him. So I don't know if his name came about that after he got his little run in the NWA, or did it had anything to do with that?
This is a total guess. I would say you give what you get, and after that, he probably started laying them in himself.
Yeah.
And then his reputation came from what he was doing as opposed to what we did.
Yeah. Any questions, Chris?
No, I'm reminiscent because I thoroughly enjoy when I see kicks and punches going in your face. So,
I always enjoyed it. Now the question is, did you enjoy more of the hard-hitting style wrestling going to Japan? Was there a big difference in styles, the way that you lay your stuff in, comparison to the American style?
I think what I found in Japan was the matches weren't as good as far as being able to work something out with someone that you might be around all the time in the States or that you know well. We wrestled a lot of people that it was just one night, that night. So it was a lot of tackle, drop down, hip toss crap. It wasn't that's what I remember about it. It was the when you're here, and I remember wrestling for Rumble and wrestling Vic Steamboat 20 times. Mm-hmm. By the 4th or 5th time, we're not even talking about anything. We're really wrestling.
We're just working, yeah.
We're just working, yeah, and calling it out there. And so that was a big difference. And there was a lot of partying in Japan. It was the wrestling was secondary to these crazy nights of drinking with, real hardcore, old school guys like Wild Bill Irwin. I remember being with Wild Bill Irwin and Barry Darso in a hotel lobby. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm I'm going to bed. And they were like, what? You're doing what? And it was what are you up?
This is open
you
mic.
can
You can say
it is.
no
censorship
what are you, a
pussy?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm tired. I want to go to bed. And the next morning, they were shaming me. They were very disappointed. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, but that's how they did it back then. I don't know if you guys watched that show about Adrian Adonis. These guys were
I
right.
just watched that.
Yeah,
They were right alongside of them. Those guys were totally different caliber of partiers than we were.
Okay. Chris?
No, if ironically that episode just dropped, Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah, I just watched it.
Everybody liked Adrian.
Yeah.
So so you said the matches weren't as good. Do you think that was because of the language, or do you think they had something to prove? That they could beat the Americans, or the Americans weren't as good? Do you think there was any animosity there, or just sometimes we know you just don't click with people that you wrestle?
All of the above. What I noticed was every Japanese guy I ever wrestled acted like he didn't speak English. And then you get in the ring, you go through an interpreter, you get in the ring, and they don't want to sell. Mm-hmm. They just want to do their stuff. So I would eventually get to the point where I would get them on the ground and just start putting the boots to them, and all of a sudden they speak English. All of a sudden it's like headlock, and it's like, okay, I thought you didn't speak English. Yeah. But so they do not want to lose. I never had an ego about laying down for anybody. I would let anybody pin me as long as it was done right. So, like, we were in a position with the belts that we didn't lose at all in Japan because we'd be losing the belts. Mm-hmm. So, but the pride that the Japanese wrestlers had in themselves, in their country, and us guys, we were just like stupid Americans to them. We really were. Mm-hmm. They did not want to lose to us.
So, you mentioned the partying, you mentioned, the matches being different and the way that the style was as far as they not wanting to, like, sell or put the American guys over. Does that mean you enjoy more your work in the States than the times you were in Japan, or?
There were things that I loved about all of it. I loved, every time I got to step into a wrestling ring, I absolutely loved it. I was right where I wanted to be. A lot of kids grew up wanting to play left field for the Red Sox or be quarterback for the Patriots. I wanted to be in a WWE ring. That's what I wanted to do. And so anytime I got to get into any ring, whether it was on the smallest scale and the smallest level in a VFW hall or in the Fleet Center in Boston, it was the same thing to me. It just was. And there were a lot of things I loved about going to Japan. Like, I got to go to Japan and wrestle on somebody else's dime. I never paid for a plane ticket. I got paid to wrestle over there. There was no on the first two tours, they treated us like rock stars. Like, we would get our meals paid for, drinks paid for. It's unheard of. The promoter over there for World Pro Wrestling was this really cool guy. He had this big, huge pot belly, and every time we would walk into a restaurant, he would want everybody to be cleared out of the place, and then it was just on. We could do whatever, eat and drink whatever we wanted. It was phenomenal. So there was that doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. Here it's like, here's where the show is. You get yourself there, and if you're lucky, you get a hotel room. At least that's what it was when I wrestled.
Okay. Okay, so now my next question is, now I'm going to get back into the States. We talked about Japan and all that. What were your favorite promoters besides, obviously, Rumble, to work for? Oh, we got a treat there. We got the Nux there.
Yeah.
Might have to get this guy.
Yeah.
I have to get this.
Well, you got a bigger head to put some knots on.
Oh,
yeah, that's true. Right. Hey, Danny, what are you doing? Come over here. Nux has something for you.
So going back to the question, working in the States, some of your favorite promoters and some of the least favorite promoters that you work for.
So obviously, anytime I got to step into a WWF ring, which is what it was called back then, was an honor. And it was a privilege, and I was really lucky to be there. I was like in my 30s. I was way too old. I was a step behind. I was partying way too much. But, I got to wrestle some of the biggest stars in the world. There was this guy named Tom Jeanette. I don't know if you guys ever remember Tom Jeanette. He used to do fairs around New England. Mm-hmm. And we would go, and he paid good, and he had this core group of guys that would be there, like Snooker and the Metal Maniac, Demolition Axe, Scott Taylor, Cousin Luke, myself, and I wrestled Scott Taylor on a lot of these fairs, so that's like a night off. And I loved wrestling for Tom Jeanette. I loved wrestling at these fairs because they were usually free. The wrestling show was free because you paid for admission for the fair.
For the fair.
So it's a massive crowd, and I liked wrestling for Yankee Pro Wrestling, Joe Eugenio. A lot of people say whatever they say. Silvano Souza also had a promotion called the AWF, and Silvano Souza ran excellent, top-notch shows. Mm-hmm. I wrestled with a guy by the name of Steve Bradley on all of his shows, and I just tried to keep up with that kid. He was just amazing. He was phenomenal, and just such a tragic story. another person that's passed away. But I also, when I got to go on the road for the NWA, whether it was down in Texas or all the other little independents around the Mid-Atlantic, I mean, I got to wrestle a lot with I don't think there was anyone that I really disliked. Like when I got in the ring, it was like my chance to do my thing. So I wasn't really paying attention a whole lot to what was going on. The other matches, anything that was going on, I just wanted to wrestle. I wanted to wrestle so bad back then, like as much as I could. But without a doubt, my all-time favorite would be the NWA with Tony Rumble, the Century Wrestling Alliance with Tony Rumble, because those guys, that guy was he was like an older brother to me. You know, he put me in so many good positions. I could go on and on about the positions that Rumble put me in. Like the first ever Eddie Gilbert Memorial show, I was on that show. You know, I would have no chance of getting booked on that show. Yep. I went into the locker room, Dory Funk Jr., Doug Gilbert, Jerry Lawler, Abdullah the Butcher. How am I going to get on those shows? Rumble's like, you're booked on the show in the first match, and I went over. Wow. So so it would be hard for me not to have the founder, leader of the Brotherhood, Tony Rumble, at the top of the list of my favorite to wrestle for.
Okay.
What I'm thinking from there, so Tony died in October of '99. What happened from there?
So when Tony Rumble passed away, the wrestling landscape in New England changed forever, because there were a bunch of people that wrestled for him that ended up all trying to go out and run their own wrestling promotions, myself included. And it was better when Tony was running the show and we all had our roles with Tony. I just thought it was so much better. I never really wanted to be a promoter. I felt like I had to do it to try and carry on his legacy. I originally started out with Tony's wife with the NWA, and she ended up wanting Jason to take over, and he ended up taking on the whole Jason Rumble persona. And then I started my own wrestling promotion called Wrestling Star Wars in Salisbury Beach, and had a pretty good run with that for almost 3 years up on the North Shore. And you know, we had our own TV. I did 102 weeks of TV, and which is a lot, and gave a lot of young wrestlers the opportunity to wrestle. And that was what I really enjoyed doing more than wrestling, believe it or not. Once my time in the ring was over, I really enjoyed helping other people, which I'm sure you can relate to, helping other people have an opportunity for them to go to the next level.
Okay. I did go back and see that Blackheart was one of those young people that wrestled for your company.
I did. I wrestled for, when I wrestled for Knuckles, I wrestled for Astro Man, and we just did an event with Astro Man about 2 weeks ago.
He's still, by the way, he says hi.
Astro Man is one of my favorite humans on the planet. I need to get in touch with him.
Yes, I'll put you in touch.
Yeah.
He sent his love to you. So now, Tony passed away. You started running your own shows. What happened? Why do you stop?
So, like everything in life, whatever it is, I think when you start it, an hourglass gets turned over. And it's only, whether it's a wrestling career, I don't care if you're Hulk Hogan, the hourglass gets turned over. It's just a matter of how slowly it ends. I was definitely partying way too much, lots of drinking and drugs. And at one point, I was standing outside of my ring, watching a couple of kids wrestle inside of the ring, and they did something they had just seen on TV Monday night. And the kid's head misses the canvas by like an inch. And I'm like, he could be dead or crippled right now. And I remember just thinking, I'm packing it in. I'm done. I'm done with this. And you brought up Victor, Astro Man. I sold my ring to Astro. I shut everything down. And I was living up there. And I'm a Rhode Island guy. I lived here in West Warwick for 10 years back in the 1980s. And I wanted to come back home to be closer to my family and closer to my folks, and that's what I did. It was just time for me to walk away from wrestling, and I literally walked away. That was it. Like for years and years, I had no involvement with it at all.
Well, that was my next question. Once you walked away, you stood away completely. Is there a time along the way that you kind of get the itch and you want to come back, either active wrestling or running shows?
I don't think my body could take active wrestling anymore, but I have had little involvements with wrestling. Like, for example, I think it was around 2013. a kid by the name of Joe Moakley wanted to start running wrestling shows, and I told him he could use the name Wrestling Star Wars. It was in the same area, and he let me and Jeff Katz come up there and do his TV announcing for him. So I did get back into it for a little bit back then, and he went on to opening Atlantic Pro Wrestling, had a very successful run, as you guys probably know, up there on the North Shore, and I've also my thing now, as you know, is I'm a writer, and I like to help people out if I can, writing about wrestlers, writing about upcoming shows, or doing whatever I can to help in that way, because I don't know where the whole writing thing came from, but it turns out I can write like a motherfucker.
Well, yeah, that was gonna he's jumping the gun on me.
No, I like
that was
it.
gonna be my next question. So now you stop wrestling, and now you're doing great work writing, and how did it came about? You know, that was a talent that you had that you didn't know about.
Right. Yeah. I all I can say is the universe wanted me to become a writer, and I barely graduated from high school, and I wrote a 400-page book that at one time in 2019 went to #1 in new releases on wrestling books, which was crazy that happened. And I knocked the Bella Twins out of first place on Amazon. Wow. They were probably saying, "Who the fuck is Knuckles Nelson?" and then Drew McIntyre knocked me out, and that was a few years ago. And like I said with the Hourglass Theory, you know, that was a few years ago. My book did really well, and I'm negotiating with a guy in Rhode Island right now that's very interested in turning a section of that book into a movie, which would be fantastic. And we're working on that right now. I can't really say too much more about it because it's just in the talking stage. But I'm very optimistic that it's going to happen because he's a big Valiant Brothers fan, and I have a very close relationship with Jimmy Valiant. So to be continued on that note. But I also am a writer for Rhode Island News Today, which I have been very fortunate to cover things like movie premieres, restaurant openings. I do a lot of boxing and MMA events for CES, the premier boxing and MMA promotion here in Rhode Island with Mr. Birchfield, Jimmy Birchfield Sr., who is been very, very good to me. And I just, keep plugging along with the writing, and you never know. Sometimes I think another book could be in the future, but we'll see what happens right now with that.
So the first book, for all the new audience members that are watching and listening, what is the name of the book and where they can find it?
Well, the book is called Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat, because at one point I became heavily involved in yoga, and it was a big part of my journey to get my life back on track. And the book is available on Amazon, or you could also visit my website, yogibiker.net, and that'll take you to the Amazon link. And there's a lot in that book, a lot of different things. I've had people very close to me tell me that you could have wrote 3 or 4 books with all the information that's in there, but I threw it all up in one book, and like it's it was a few years ago now that I released it, but I'm very proud that I can say I'm an author.
Yeah.
I like it. There's a message from that book that you can put out there, because it sounds like at that time you were struggling. That unfortunately a lot of people we know do struggle, and they some days go down the wrong road. Is there something that you can give them to inspire them to not go down that road, or to literally order that book to help them get that turn?
I think if people that may have had issues with drugs or alcohol, or maybe mental health issues, or having a bad temper, whatever it is, that you don't have to live like that. You can turn it around, and also that you can be a kid from Situate, Rhode Island, that had a dream of becoming a professional wrestler and actually got off the couch and did it, and then became an author after that. And I think the biggest message from the book is you can do whatever you want. You can accomplish anything that you want. And my way of doing it, you'd have to read the book to find out.
Okay. There you
I
go. So
like
you gotta
it.
go pick up that book in Amazon. Make sure you check it
Danny,
out.
can you put that link up?
Yeah, it's up right now
That's
on
perfect.
screen. And since we're getting into plugs real quick, we got some shows coming up. And
Yes,
actually,
we do.
We're back on track tomorrow night. July 14 we'll be live at the Showcase Pro Wrestling Training Center Arena in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. That's 126 Main Street, with 7:47 p.m. bell time. The next event will be in Providence, Rhode Island, India Point Park, for the Puerto Rican Fest. That's 2 p.m. bell time. We're gonna be there live, And also before that, you know, we forgot to plug in the New England Hall of Fame. That's going to be July 28th at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Warwick, Rhode Island, followed by the next day, Fan Fest, also at the Crown Plaza. You're gonna be down there for that.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is that show at India Point Park for the Puerto Rican Festival is going to be off the hook.
Yeah, it's gonna get crazy. He's got to keep on track there because he's been a little shady here and there. So we'll see what happens.
Well, as far as the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame goes, I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014. I know there's other Hall of Famers in this room. I think Joe Bruin does not get enough credit for what he does and for creating that hall and for also bringing in all these, I'm going to use the word old-time wrestlers and helping them get a payday and helping them put some money in their pocket by having this Fan Fest thing. And at the Hall of Fame, I'm going to drop this right now. I will be inducting the Mad Dog, DC Drake, into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, which is going to be a great, big, huge, gigantic honor for me.
Well, what a great night that's going to be, definitely. And that's going to be July 28th. Again, Crown Plaza Hotel in Warwick, Rhode Island, followed by the next day, July 29th, Fan Fest. August, we're going into August, and we're back in August at the Showcase Training Center and Arena in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Big news there.
Breaking news. I think this is the first time ever in Rhode Island and probably a couple of decades in New England. 2-ring battle royal.
2 rings. Wow. That's gonna be intense. Are you gonna be in the battle royal?
I have not reviewed the contract yet, but it is actually, you know, what I'm putting is an open invitation. So if anybody in this room, they feeling, as Joe Davis used to say, a little froggy, if they want to come in and get a couple lickings in, that's more than well. But anything out there, if you are a wrestler in New England, the tri-state area, DC Drake, if you're in that area, come on down. You are invited to enter the 2-ring battle royal, and we'll be announcing stipulations because there's a couple of ways we're thinking of putting this together.
Are you gonna have some shady shit going down?
What are you talking about?
I don't know, man.
See, you know the problem is you bring the promoter and the wrestler together, 2 different people.
Well, you know,
totally different. Business is one thing, wrestling's another.
I got in that with Nux here. I asked him about the promoters he liked, and it seemed like you were very friendly with the promoters you worked for. You were lucky in that aspect.
Well, from what I'm hearing now, I was extremely lucky.
Oh, no, you want to? Oh, why don't we drop some of the names that you love to bring up?
Well, did you ever work for Mike Spotter?
I have never one time worked for Mike Spotter, but I know all the stories.
Oh, yes.
All right, what about a frequent caller on the 508, Rocky Raymond?
Rocky Raymond, another person I know very well, and yes, I did work for Rocky on a handful, half a dozen occasions, yes. And I have nothing to say bad about anyone that put me in a wrestling ring, and I never had... I remember Rocky Raymond told me that he thought I was a little cocky, and he was probably right, because, Rocky Raymond is an enigma. The guy is like, he's... I don't have the words to describe Rocky Raymond, but when I see him, I give him a big hug.
Yeah, well, just imagine Spotter and Rocky and Chris Sataro locked in a room together.
We may be able to get that happen.
That'd be crazy. Any questions moving forward?
No, I mean I like, because this is bringing the past, the future, all together, and the fact that we can actually tell stories, and hopefully some of the young guys will actually look it up and look up your matches, reach out and tell stories. Because I'm a big fan. I love stories, especially in wrestling. They don't have to be real. They don't have to be right. They don't have to be true. But stories should be told. So I think we just touch a tip of the story, because I am sure there are stories.
Well, you're teasing it, No.
I don't know the stories.
That'll be the next question. Any roast stories you could share with us here on the show that pop out right off the top of your head? Any crazy roast stories?
That's pretty general. Yeah, there's many road stories. One night in Japan, and all I can say is in Japan because I had no idea where I was, there was a group of wrestlers that were drinking in a hotel lobby before we went out, but we never went out. It ended up turning into 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And One of the wrestlers was from Minnesota who wrestled under the name Horace the Psychopath, was dared to run down the street butt naked in a city in Japan, and he did. And I just couldn't imagine this 300-pound guy running down the street with the oncoming cars, with the poor Japanese families with their kids in the car, seeing a human Godzilla running down the street, and that actually happened, and there is video footage to prove
Oh
it.
man, you ever had to run down the street naked, Chris?
No, I haven't.
All right.
But on the other hand, the night's not over, so.
Yeah, well, just let me know so I can cover my eyes. So, speaking of crazy stories and getting far along with stories, you mentioned about yoga saving you and changing your life. How do you get involved in yoga? How did you find yoga down the line after you was done wrestling?
Well, I live right down the road here at Peace in North Kingstown. I own a home down there, and there's a yoga studio called Rhode Island Power Yoga. And in 2014, after the death of my mother, after a terrible breakup, things weren't really going well in life. I walked into a yoga studio for the first time, and it was a hot yoga class, and I really didn't know if I was going to be able to make it through the class, but I did. I completed the class, and after that, yoga was just one of those things, kind of like wrestling, that just, it got in me, and it became a big part of my life to this very day. It's not so much the physical practice as it is the mindfulness of being able to stay in a 100-degree room and hold a yoga pose, and it's more tied into wrestling than you would think. And I wouldn't say that it saved my life, but I would say it was one of the steps along the path that helped me to get to a better place than I was before.
Okay.
Is that all in the book?
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is.
All right. Do you have physical copies?
I sure do.
You do. All right. So I think we got to work out something.
Yeah, get
I think
Nux down to one of the shows.
No, we'll get them down the shows. If
no.
you're welcome to come down and talk to the kids. Maybe we do.
I'd love to. I'd be more than happy
Maybe
to.
we'll do a requirement for them to read the book.
That'll be definitely homework. So, one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I'm backtracking on this. So we talked about Tony passing away. Obviously, it was a surprise to all you guys that did he suddenly just pass, and operations completely stopped at that point of the NWA?
Yeah, I actually know exactly what happened because his wife told me. He was having chest pains. He didn't really know what was wrong. They took him to the hospital to get checked out, and the doctor came out and said, I'm sorry, he's gone. And his wife said, where did he go? He went home? It was that much of a shock. And he said, no, he's gone. And and everything did stop. It just did. Like we were cooking too. The NWA New England was really doing well, and we had broadcast television on WNDS in New Hampshire, which reached a lot of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And I mean, no one really knew what to do. Like it wasn't. Ellen, his wife, came to me and said, I want you to run the business, but I really didn't want to. I didn't really, and then when I found out some of the ways that they wanted it to be run, it wasn't for me. And Jason took over, but it was, there was, I had a lot. Luckily, I had the opportunity to still do TV tapings for WWF, and was still doing that, and also went back to Japan after that too. But the day that Tony died, a part of my wrestling love died. He was just such a good guy, and you start naming the people that he helped and the doors that he opened. It's hard to fathom that you could walk into one of his locker rooms and Jim Cornette and Kevin Sullivan would be there, both from WWF and WCW. I don't think there was any other independent promotion in the country that could claim that, because I watched people like Rick Fuller, Devin Storm, myself, Sprazier. Next thing you know, we're on Monday Nitro and Monday Night Raw and all of those shows because Kevin or Cornette saw us on one of Tony's shows, and they were very close friends.
So speaking of Raw and like Nitro, you got to be a part of both groups. You worked for WCW as well. Your experiences working for the opposition and how operations were handled from going to WWF to WCW? Was there a big difference?
Yeah, obviously nothing is like the WWE. I mean, like I wasn't there long enough or in depth enough to say what was really going on behind the scenes. I was just there as enhancement talent, but I also saw what was going on around me, and I know that the WWE was nothing is run to this day like that, right? It's just it is what it is. It's the major leagues of wrestling.
Yeah, definitely get that feel when from the minute you walk into the building or arena and to the moment you leave, it's like the biggest thing. And people that have never been even backstage, they don't realize how big this machine is. It's crazy. Any favorite opponents that you had along the way to work with?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them already. Obviously when you're in the WWF or the WCW, you don't have much say in what's going to go on in the ring. You just do what you're told.
Yes.
And on the independents, when Steve Bradley was just, I always felt like me and him, we just tore it down everywhere we went. Also, same thing with Vic Steamboat. Same thing with Devin Storm, who ended up he was Crowbar in WCW. Yep. We had a lot of matches as the NWA Tag Team Champions against the Public Enemy, Flyboy Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge. And those guys were awesome guys. They were really, both passed away. They were both just phenomenal in and out of the ring. Like, I learned a lot from them just, hanging out with them. And so the Public Enemy would be up there as
one of your favorites.
Yeah, because you didn't talk about anything with the Public Enemy because it was a real fight. You just went out there and fought. There was no wrestling. There was no spots. There was no. You went in the ring and you were out of the ring and in the crowd for the rest of the match as soon as it happened. And when I think back about it now, I am lucky that I'm still alive. Like getting put through tables and the chair shots and the hey, why don't I suplex you over the top rope? Yeah, okay. And just the stuff that we do and don't even think twice about it is it's pretty crazy.
Chris?
Eric Spracia. When Tony passed, were you guys still tagging?
At one point, Eric Spracia walked away from wrestling because he had a mortgage, he had a kid, and he couldn't keep going on the notion of maybe we'll make it big someday. And when I look back, at the time I was pissed. I was not happy that he did it. But looking back on it now, I totally understand why he did it. Eric's as far as I know, he's a very, very successful man. He owns a street sweeping company in Revere. And he did what he had to do. And so, no, we weren't tagging at that point. At one point, I tagged very briefly with Rick Fuller just to transition the belts. And then it was Duke Stallman after that.
So Duke, how, like I mentioned before, in that 6-man tag, was he always part of your faction, or he became part of it later down the line towards the end of the run in NWA?
He came later because it was me and Eric, and then when Eric left, it was me and Dukes, and the names Knuckles Nelson and Duke Stallman obviously worked really well together. And I remember, having matches with the Headbangers in the WWF. And they were competitive matches. They were looking at us but what happened, and we didn't get signed, but it sure was fun.
Chris?
No, I love the timeline because, ironically, I had my first match with Tony September 25th of '99, and then I was supposed to wrestle, I believe, Gino Martino in Connecticut on the day that Tony passed.
Wow.
So it's to bring like that whole timeline together, it kind of, sheds light on different careers, and it's just funny how everything is tied together.
So I would never say anything bad about anything, but anyone or anything in wrestling. But it's a shame that he died when he did, because all the other little, whether it was Sheldon Goldberg's promotion, which was excellent, NWA New England, Wrestling Star Wars, and I'm sure there's others that I'm missing. they all were missing something. They were all pieces of what we were with Tony Rumble's group, and we'll never know what it would have been. But I know we were on broadcast television, and he had a vision. Tony really had a vision of wanting to bring back territories. He wanted us to be the NWA New England. I was the NWA New England champion, and one day he said to me, we're going to start calling you the NWA champion, and it's going to piss everybody off, and we're going to do it even more because we want us to be recognized as the NWA world champion. And I said, I love it. Let's do that. And we did. And it was only for a short time, though, because then, as we know, we lost Tony. But I like that everyone went on with wrestling and did what they did, but it was never the same for me.
No, it all makes sense. I know when that all happened, I was really getting started, and Jason was in my class, and I thought it was kind of, Jason was in there about 2 years, and now he's kind of running a promotion. To me, that kind of took me because I didn't know,
I never really embraced the whole Boston Bad Boy Jason Rumble thing. But as time went on, I did embrace it. And then and Jason is the one that was very instrumental in having the 20-year anniversary of Tony Rumble's passing and reunited everybody and got us all together in one arena. And I just love him for that because that was a really class act and a class move. And that night, I was proud to call him the Boston Bad Boy Jason Rumble.
Well, now that we mentioned Jason, and shout out to Jason, he's one of my guys. I always had fun. We had good matches together. He must have had some kind of relation with Tony since he got to, take over the name, and his wife asked him to take over the company. Did he had a good relationship with Tony?
I'm sure he did, but I think the relationship was more with Tony's wife. Okay. I think that he came in after. They made the decision they wanted to go with him. This was a long time ago, but it was the right move because I was going up to the North Shore to do my thing, and I loved what I did up there, and they ran for a long time, and I think that it wasn't so much his relationship with Tony as it was with his wife Ellen.
Okay. Chris,
I love the New England history.
Well, speaking of New England history, Nux, do you watch any of the current product? Do you watch any of the current guys that are out there?
Sure, I do. I when AEW started up, I was totally into it. I just liked that there was finally an alternative for wrestling fans that wasn't WWE, and it gave guys a chance to wrestle. And a lot of people give, a hard time to some of the wrestlers in AEW, but whether it was Cody or the Young Bucks or Kenny Omega or Hangman Page, who came from Jimmy Valiant's Boogie's Wrestling Camp in Shawsville, Virginia, I thought they were killing themselves. They were putting on amazing matches, and the Lucha Brothers are fantastic. And, I could go on and on. So, yeah, I enjoy that product very much, and I can go on YouTube and go down the rabbit hole too. Mm-hmm. You just never know what you're going to find on YouTube, and just sit there and
watch
and find a gem here or there. Like I recently saw the British Bulldogs against the Rock and Roll Express. I never even knew that happened. So like you never know what you're going to see on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned Jimmy Valiant. How did that relationship form? How that came about?
So that's a big part of my book. In 2018, I was not doing well in life. I was having a really hard time, and I decided that I was going to jump on my Harley and drive down deep into the mountains of Virginia to a little town called Shawsville and look up my childhood hero, a guy by the name of Handsome Jimmy, the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. And that's exactly what I did, and he's like a second father to me today. Boogie helped me. He offered a lot of his life experience and a lot of what he feels is his philosophy on living a happy life. And I wrote all about it in my book, and every year since 2018, I go down and visit Boogie on his birthday. I'll be going down there in a couple of weeks. And Jimmy Valiant was a trailblazer in wrestling, from the catchphrases on the back of his jackets to being in the Valiant Brothers. And my favorite jacket that he wore to the ring said "First Class Male," M-A-L-E. That's badass, right?
That's badass, yeah. Definitely, a great one.
I think that's going to be
Boogie
that's a new T-shirt we're coming up with. I like it.
So that's badass, right?
That's Gimmick in French McChrist.
I-
See, he's being
No,
shady.
no, no,
again.
no.
This is what I mean.
Legacy.
This is what I mean. But anyways, Nux, again, where can they find the book and your social media for all the people watching, all the fans that are listening?
Well, the book is Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat. You can find that on Amazon. You can also check me out at Knuckles Nelson on Facebook, Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat on Facebook and Instagram. And my website is yogibiker.net.
All right. So then again, before we take off tonight, we're in action tomorrow night, July 14th, at the Showcase Pro Wrestling Training Center, 126 Main Street in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. That's 7:47 p.m. bell time. July 30th will be in India Point Park in Providence, Rhode Island for the Puerto Rican Bay Fest. That's a 2 p.m. bell time. And on the 28th of July, New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, Crown Plaza Hotel, Warwick, Rhode Island. The 29th, Fan Fest at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Warwick, Rhode Island. Blackheart?
As everything, SP Wrestling on all social media. Make sure if you're watching, when you're sharing, hit subscribe. Let's get over 1,000. We're getting up there, but subscribe, share, tell everybody, and also give us feedback. What you like, what you don't like, guests that you want, stories that you want to be heard. The ones that maybe some people don't want to be heard. Those are the stories that we want. Open mic anytime. If you want to be a guest, send us a message.
So there you go. You can find me on social media at Don Vega on Instagram and Don Vega on Facebook. Get your BWO. You see, I did a little shady thing there. Boricua.
No. That's capitalism. We encourage capitalism.
Well, whatever it is, just buy a shirt, support. And Nux, it's been an honor, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
been
And for
great
everyone
having
out there that's watching, I'm Boston born and Boston bred, and I'll be Boston bad till I'm Boston dead.
There you go. That's all the man had to say. We'll see you next time in the Showcase Pod. For Don Vega, Chris Blackheart, Knuckles Nelson, we'll catch you down the road.